Welcome. Welcome everybody to TechSoup courses. We are thrilled today to have the first of our Ask the Expert events with the experts who share their knowledge and experience and provided so much content and guidance for putting these courses together. Today we have Joe Hillis with us, and I just want to just explain the format of this, and then we'll jump right in. So what we'll be doing is I'm going to do a brief introduction of Joe. He has so much experience that I kind of had to pick and choose and see. Otherwise, we would be here for probably the full hour talking about his background, but that's why we pulled him into this project. And then what we'll do is we're going to have a question and answer session. We have some questions already that have reached us, and then if there are any other questions, put them in the chat, and then we'll go from there. So just starting out, so Joe is systems and engineering technical consultant to small and medium enterprises. He is the co-founder and the operations director of Information Technology Disaster Resource Center. And they're a volunteer-driven nonprofit, and they bring communications and tech resources to areas after there is a disaster. 25 years of public safety and information technology. So that kind of interesting mix of being prepared, getting prepared for a disaster, and the technology end of it. And right now he is currently in the Bahamas, where he had just been deployed. So I just wanted to do a big welcome to Joe. And before we get into any of our questions, I thought, because you are deployed in the Bahamas right now, if you could just tell us a little bit of what you've been seeing and what you've been doing.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate that. You've been in the, well, let me back up. So Hurricane Dorian struck about 6 weeks ago. It slowed down over the Bahamas, the northern islands of the Bahamas, and dumped rain for a couple of days, and then 200+ mile-an-hour winds. So it decimated the northern islands of the Bahamas. So our organization received several requests to help get some critical key resources online, the airport, the shipping port, the power company, places like that, as well as our nonprofit partners from the U.S., many of the ones that we run do disaster relief with in the United States. So received a number of requests. So we have run, I don't know what the number is, 30, 35 people, tech volunteers through here, and done a lot to bring up some of these critical resources. Certainly the airports is a big thing. That's how the relief equipment and the people get in here, the workers get in here. And so, yeah, so we're just, so it's my turn in the barrel. I've been down here for a little over a week, I think. I've got another week left. And so I'm on a 2-day break from Abaco, which is where we've been working there. So lots of key critical resources, all the medical places are down. Connectivity is largely down. Certainly the wireline connectivity, the fiber, the cell towers are coming back up. Many of them are on temporary stuff. Power is still down, certainly the eastern half of Grand Bahama Island, as well as the northern half of Abaco, which is another island. So I think all total, they say there were about 70,000 people that live in those areas. And so lots of paralysis right now. And so that's that. So that's my summary there. Happy to take a deeper dive into some of the stuff we're doing, but I don't think that's really exactly what we're here for today.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's so amazing. I think we all watch the news and we do see the, the footage, and then we see the emergency personnel going in. But to hear kind of, a firsthand report of what's happening, and I think it kind of speaks to the fact that you've been there for a week. You're going to be there for another week, and it sounds like it's going to be a long process, just how complicated the rebuilding process can be. So I wanted to just to ask like a general question. So for you, in the terms of the work you do, when you're talking to a nonprofit or and helping them digitally prepared, what are the most important things that you ask them to think about?
Well, there's a number of things. The prior to technology, we had, typically there's a manual process to do everything. And unfortunately, we get so dependent on technology, we forget about the manual processes. So probably one of the early things that we try to do is remind people that to have a manual process, there are some um, significant events that will take away power for long periods of time, will take away communications for a long period of time, and your choices become, do I cease to do business or do I find an alternate way to do that? So I usually push people to come up with a manual method to do, to continue their operations. And you would be surprised how many McDonald's just can't open because they don't have their cash registers, or watching people, they don't have, alternate ways to continue to serve food or things like that, or certainly, transact business. So, I mean, that's just an example there. I mean, I just could spend days, weeks, it seems like, just walking through somebody of all the things to be aware of. But probably one of my number one things is just make sure that you don't fear that you have a manual process, and whether that means that you have a receipt book, whether you have general ledgers, whether you have forms that are pre-printed that you can, track your inventory on. Just today, I mean, just within the last hour, I stopped at to get something to eat. They don't have credit card machines. They're writing everything by hand. So the good thing is, I mean, that they had a process in place to do that, and so they were able to stay open and do that. So
Wow, that is, I'm just kind of wrapping my head around that. That's so interesting and so true. And I think very much so that we do rely so much on technology that we forget that there are so many things that we can't do. And it's a little bit ironic to think that we're kind of going back to that manual process, but it sounds like that's kind of part of like of the backup plan. um,
it is, and I agree. And of course, in addition, there's just a long list. So that was kind of my manual tip for the
mhm.
day. There are so many other things as far as in order to keep your technology functioning, and that's ultimately where you want to be. That's the state you want to be, is where your stuff is, where you're able to continue to use your systems. But yeah, don't. I guess that's the last ditch effort of, need to have a manual process to do that. So go ahead. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. And then, but I just want to throw, so in terms of, so we've here in Northern California have been experiencing these kind of rolling blackouts that the PG&E, our power company, has been doing in order to prevent the wildfires that happened last year at this time. And there were similar winds and conditions for it. And what was interesting is that the number of people that have generators in order to keep the power going. Is that something that like, if you're in an area where that you're going to be being hit by these things, do you see more like organizations having generators? And is there a way, I'm just trying to think, for like one organization to like, because I imagine that would be quite a cost to have a generator. Is there a way to, I guess, like, move it around for different organizations? If you could just, like, what do you see in terms of generators, just in terms of getting the power?
Yeah, well, good question. So, a lot of varied experience with the generator side. So, go back to Hurricane Sandy back in 2012. People would stand in line for 3, 4 hours with a 5-gallon gas can just to get 5 gallons of fuel. So, never mind the cost of what they were paying for it, but that 5 gallons of fuel will not run a generator 8 hours, or it may run a
Okay.
generator 8 hours. So these are calculated risks, right? So it could be that maybe you only need it open, you're going to open your business for 4 hours, or your organization for 4 to 6 hours a day. Probably it may be worth that for you to do that. Unfortunately, just getting a large, cache of fuel to run a generator sometimes is difficult. So I'm a big fan of organizations. I know the United Ways typically will have larger spaces where they have many nonprofits that come in there. Chambers of Commerce are another great place where it's something that they can offer a space. If we can, our organization, if we can go set some telephones, some Wi-Fi on a satellite connection in the Chamber of Commerce, and know that 100 or 200 members are going to be able to come to this organization, check their email, transact their business or whatever that is, come and go as they want, then we only have to worry about lighting up one place instead of 100 businesses, right? So that was, one of the things in prep for this was to, think about my top 5 things. And I think that's really going backwards. That's probably my number 5 thing, which is,
Mm-hmm.
having an alternate location where you can do this.
Mm.
If you're regardless of what the nonprofit is, there are synergies with other nonprofits in the business. I mean, we work with a lot of different nonprofits, and we share our expertise with them, and in return, they share their expertise with us. Same thing with resources. Trust me, ITDRC did not bring all this equipment, all these people down to the Bahamas by ourselves. We had a lot of logistical help from other NGOs as well as the private sector. So that would be my thing, which is to find an alternate place. And if it's a small business, I mean, certainly you have suppliers, right? So if you're a janitorial supply company, well, who's your paper distributor? Maybe they can give you a desk or two in their place where you can
Mm.
continue operations, and hopefully they have deep enough pockets to be able to keep the lights on and provide you with communication. So that's my number 5 tip.
Well, and it's interesting because the thing I'm taking notes as here, and I'm fairly old school, so I guess I'm doing like the manual way. But I'm taking notes as you're talking, and it seems like what you just keep on talking about like communications, because that it seems like that's kind of key.
That's it.
So actually, we have a question here. Oh, this is a really good question. So, side effect of using cloud technology, you have accounts, you have passwords to keep track of. How, what's your recommendation in terms of securely managing the platform's passwords, users? How to do it to be, I guess, prepared for, a disaster, and then what to do after?
So the bigger technology companies, whether it's Microsoft, whether it's Google, they both have robust cloud platform applications, and so that directory, the security is all managed in the cloud for those. It's only the larger nonprofits or larger businesses that really need an on-prem, and there's exceptions to everything, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you're doing mapping, that's the last thing you want to do is do that remotely in the cloud. So you'll need that mapping server down locally inside your 4 walls. Totally get it. But I think for the majority of your things, certainly your file and print access, if you will, your many applications, whether it's your accounting, whether it's your CRM, those things can all be hosted in the cloud. Then all you have to worry, I mean, it has its native security with it, right? So if you're using
Mm-hmm.
Salesforce, for example, all the security permissions are all handled by Salesforce. And so you just need to remember your credentials to do that. And typically there's a process to reset your credentials if for some reason you're having to log in from not your computer. So same thing, there are password storage applications online
Mm-hmm.
that you can subscribe to one of those, store all your passwords in there, then you've got to remember one, and then that can get you into your other things. So I mean, a big proponent of, putting as much of your non-essential stuff, and um, not that your files are not essential, but they're things that you might need to access somewhere else. I'm in the Bahamas. I'm still running a nonprofit back in the US. It's not possible, it wouldn't be possible for me to do that unless I was able to access all my files and, our CRM and accounting and everything else in the cloud. And I'm able to do that here with just with the cellular connection.
And I wonder if one of the preconceptions or misconceptions of cloud technology is that it's it's more open, it's more dangerous, it's not as secure. I don't know if that's something that you, because it seems like that's been, at least at my time here at TechSoup, that's been one of the, well, I don't want to put my things up in the cloud. I don't, who's going to take care of it? Anybody could get to it. And it's interesting you're talking about like the native security, that's what, the Microsoft and the Googles and, these companies are doing is they build the security around it. Related question, what is the difference between data encryption, or what is data encryption, and how is that different than password protection?
Well, so data encryption, you have it's kind of an envelope around your data, so it would be very similar to you taking writing something on a piece of paper, putting inside of an envelope, right? And so now you can no longer see what's on the piece of paper. You can further encrypt that by putting it into a manila file folder and then putting it into a FedEx folder, and nobody's going to be able to see what's on top of that piece of paper, or what's in that you wrote on that piece of paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the data is still on that piece of paper. So it's where basically your data is still, you have your data there, but it's encrypted, it's obscured in a way, and it's typically using you know great technologies to encrypt that. There are a number of different ways to do that, but and whether that's you know there's commercial things that you can use to encrypt that. I mean, there's devices you can have where you have to get two-factor authentication, for example, where that was another piece we were going to talk about on with your earlier question about how to keep your data secure. And that would be to be able to use like an RSA or something like that, a two-factor authentication. So just because somebody finds your password, or somebody guesses your password, then it sends a text, for example, to your phone, and says, now put this 4-digit or 6-digit code in there. And so it's a two-factor authentication,
Mm-hmm.
just one more extra measure to kind of keep your stuff a little bit safer. So difference between password security is to getting access to something. Encryption is something that's kind of obscured around it. It's wrapped in an envelope. There are two pieces to that. So in other words, if I tell you a secret, I give you half the secret. I hold half the secret. Takes your half, takes my half to be able to open that up and look at it.
That reminds me of, and I think they probably still do it in banks, but the two key
Mm-hmm.
access, like literally. So I had a friend who worked at a bank, and they would have to like go into the vault, and there were two people who had the actual key. So it
Right.
sounds like it's the similar process, but it's been digitized. Okay, another question here is about disastrous practices or drills. Can you give some tips on the question is how to plan it, and how often should you be having these?
Yeah, so this is going to be the least favorite thing that the students are going to like about me, is that a disaster plan is just a bunch of words on paper. And I can relate that to my own experience when I was young and I had to write a disaster plan, and I kind of poached off of somebody else, and I'm like, hey, do you have a plan that I can copy? And so a disaster plan is no good unless it's tested, and I mean really tested. So for smaller entities, I do recommend, quarterly thing. This is not, I'm telling you this for a reason. You need to have a tabletop exercise. You need to add some complexity into, to your disaster plan. Nothing is going to go as planned. I promise you. If you say that we've got a contract with a fuel vendor to keep our generator full, I can assure you the fuel vendor is going to have a breakdown on the way. They're not going to have access to fuel, whatever that is. You need to have a plan B for that. So no matter what your disaster plan is, you need to put it on paper. You need to test it. You need to make sure that every one of your employees knows what their role is in that. And kind of getting a little bit deeper into that, when you have a disaster, there's a good chance that 50. All right. Sorry, guys. I hit the mute button, and my apologies.
That's okay.
Uh, Now, what I was going to say is there was, in a disaster, there's a great chance that 50% of your employees are not going to show up. And it's not because they don't like you, but it's because they've had a catastrophe at their own home with a family member, mom, husband, whatever that is. Somebody has to, for whatever reason. So that's why it's so important to make sure that everybody is kind of cross-trained in, in every job that needs to happen. So I before I got totally distracted, I was really headed down a great road here, or at least I thought I was. You want to prompt me again on the rest?
Well, it was, I'm just thinking about, so we had a fire drill at our workplace, and it was interesting because for the, and it was a simple, this is the alarm is going to go off, this is where everybody's going to go. And, and that's a fairly cut and dry thing. And inevitably what happened is people sit up at their desks and they're like, where are we supposed to go? Who are we
Yeah,
supposed to follow?
yeah.
And it was interesting because there were people who didn't want to leave office or conference rooms.
Yeah, yeah.
And so one thing that we found is like, there was an entire committee who was then kind of empowered. They had the orange vest, but they were going around and, telling people what to do and clearing rooms when there were people on conference calls who were like, oh, this is just a practice. It's like, no, this is important. And it's true. There is something about that actual, like, physically going through the process, and walking out. We walked across the street to where we're always supposed to meet. We checked everybody off. I think it's something that, people can sometimes think, oh, this is silly, or of course we're going to know what to do, but that
Yeah, let
isn't
me add a little
necessarily
bit
true.
more context around that as well. And one of the things that there are a lot of in business, and there's a lot of nobody wants to fail, right? Nobody wants to look stupid that, oh, our disaster plan failed. That is the time to fail. And that's when you're having a disaster plan. And that's why I say you need to have a tabletop three times a year, and you need to have an actual disaster drill. And I'm talking about network wise. And this is what the big
Mm,
companies do. This is what the Amazons do. This is what the credit card companies do, where they practice these tabletop drills. They go to a recovery center somewhere, they recover critical systems. But
mm,
I have seen people do this where they didn't want to, they had a tape, for example, back when there's a lot of backups that are done to tape. And what happens if
yep.
you have a tape that fails to restore? Well, you're dead in the water. So, your next year's lesson from that should be, or your next, drill less is that take 2 sets of tapes instead of one. So if that first set fails, then now you have a second set to try to recover from. But too often people don't want to, show weakness, but this, drills, those are the times to fail. And if you're a manager, if you're an executive director of a nonprofit, you want your staff to fail, because that's what makes that's what makes them better, and that's what makes your recovery, your chances for recovery, even better. It's not going to go the way you wrote it on paper, so you need to keep that plan updated as you fail. But go ahead.
It kind of makes me think that, our plan was kind of, we got everybody out of the building, but we didn't do the follow-up of the technology bit of, of going somewhere to, can we access our systems? Can we, if we had to somehow communicate with, our nonprofit members that, that we don't have communication, how we would do that. So that actually, like, made me think about what we did, which we could have done. We could have done better. Another question here is, and this has come up a couple of times in the forum also, is a lot of people are saying that, they, they there's a, they're working on a disaster plan, but everything is very reactive instead of proactive. And how do you make that shift so it isn't that you're scrambling to, all right, we had another disaster, thank goodness this was lost, but this was saved. How do you change it to being proactive process?
Well, so again, possibly unpopular, but disaster recovery is a business decision. It's not an IT decision. There's no IT person on this planet that wants their systems to fail. So historically, they will go to
Mm,
their bosses, their directors, the board, whomever it is, and say, I need tens of thousands of dollars to have the best backup, to have, I mean, companies like Amazon, right? I mean, they
Mm-hmm.
have data centers all over the world, and if for some reason one data center goes down, that's millions per minute in transactions that they lose. So obviously we know the technology is there, that if it misses a single heartbeat, it just fails over to the other side of the country or whatever that is. Now it becomes a business decision. How much money are we willing to invest to keep our systems online? And it's a tough one, because you can spend literally tens of thousands of dollars, or if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, having an alternate system to where you'll never miss a beat. Probably for most nonprofits, that's not feasible. So now you have to start looking at, what are great alternative solutions that we can do to give us the best chance, right? So we talk about, um, we talk, I guess, talk about the risk that an organization is willing to assume. And let's just say you're a church, and most of your business transactions happen on Sunday, right? So if for some reason your systems were down, could you stand to go a week without having your systems online? If you're a church, you probably can do that. But if you're a food bank,
Mm-hmm.
you probably
Mm-hmm.
can't stand a week with your systems being offline because of your
Right.
supply chain, your orders, things like that.
Yeah.
So again, it becomes a business decision as to, how much are we willing to invest, and that's going to help drive the type of technology, the proactiveness that you put into your plan, if that answers.
And then how are you seeing that organizations are paying for this? Because this, it isn't just um, the technology, it's the planning time. And I'm thinking about one of the people in the chorus. She says, I'm an admin assistant, and all of a sudden this has just been kind of dropped on my plate. So that means, her time and whatever committee time. Is there any, do you see organizations doing anything creative in terms of funding to be able to be more proactive?
I know that each of the large players, I know Microsoft has, fund programs for nonprofits. I know that Google has programs for nonprofits. I know that, AWS has things that you
Mm-hmm.
can buy out of the TechSoup catalog, things that will, give you a running start. Salesforce.com, same thing. They give you, I think they give away 10 seats. So there are a number of organizations who make things available to a nonprofit. We're a 1,600 plus member organization. We get 10 seats from Salesforce. They're very expensive. So
Mm-hmm.
we make do with our 10 seats, and not telling you we don't share,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
between certain, things. But so yeah, I think there are resources out there. I think just this course, for example, my hope is that she can take away, some tidbits out of this to, kind of cut through the fluff. You know, Salespeople are great for some things, right? They're great on educating you on, there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
scare FUD, as we call it, into that. But I mean, I'm hoping that this course will help kind of cut out the sales part of it, and be able to pay attention to the things that are important that they need to concentrate on, because this is IT, and most nonprofits is a second or third or 10th hat for somebody, and it's an afterthought in a lot of ways.
Right, right. And that's what we're finding just in that a lot of the people who are doing this are they're what we call them, the accidental techie. And yeah, and that was, the purpose of this course was to kind of put this information out there in a way that's accessible with people's kind of busy, crazy schedules. Let me just see. All right. So I have one more question. Like, in terms of like how do so I'm just trying, let me back up. So when there's a disaster, you folks come in and you're providing the communications. But then do you find that do the organizations, and is this part of the plan, already have okay, we know these are the other organizations that we're going to work with. These are the organizations that if we have a client who comes to us and says they need food, we can do a referral. Like when you work or is that something that is that part of developing a plan, kind of developing that local, like, community to be able
Absolutely.
to share, and whether it's food, whether it's phone lines.
Yeah, I think that's probably key to your success, which is to find your partners up front,
Mm-hmm.
understand who they are. I mean, there are a number of industry organizations that, I'm sorry, industry events that you can go to shake hands with other organizations that do similar ones. And it is kind of, doing that. I spoke, I don't know, a couple of years ago at this Texas Information TARES, I think it's called, Texas Association of Information Referral Services, which is essentially all the 211 offices in the
Mm-hmm.
state of Texas. And one of the ladies came up to me and she said, "Oh, ITDRC is part of our plan, our disaster response plan." And I thought, "Well, great, and we're there to help you. Just let us know what our role is so we can be prepared to do that." So we certainly don't mind, any organization leaning on us when there's a disaster. I mean, we're all about, whatever benefits the whole community. So whatever your mission is, as long as it's, a public facing mission and it, requires tech resources, we'll certainly help you with that. But I can't emphasize enough that, relationships, the wrong time to be exchanging business cards is in the middle of a disaster. So make
Mm.
sure that you get it done in advance of a disaster.
Okay, that's great. And I love that. I just wrote down that, like, find your partner up front.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely.
That's just brilliant. And that could be, and I just, because otherwise, you know, you, you can't, I mean, the other thing that comes out, which is kind of very interesting for me, I grew up in New England. We had hurricanes and snowstorms, but not anything on the scale in the Gulf Coast and other parts of the world, but that you can't do it alone,
That's right.
right?
That's
You
right.
can't do it alone. And
You didn't build it in a week. You're not recovering it in a week. So it's a process. There's no instant gratification in disaster recovery.
yeah, yeah. This is so interesting. I don't see any other questions coming in. I want to thank you, Joe. Thank you so much for taking time out of your deployment in the Bahamas to join
Yeah,
us. It's just wonderful to be able to ask you questions, and it's just so interesting, like the themes that kept on coming up, which was like communication and partnership, and and kind of knowing what you have
mhm.
so that you can use the technology wisely and kind of being smart about it. And you did point out that there are ways to access technology that is, more reasonable for nonprofits.
Yeah.
So on that note, I would just like to say thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll let you get back to your deployment. For our participants, thank you so much for joining us. Or if you're watching the recording, thanks for watching the recording. And we will be following this up with another Ask the Expert next week with another one of our with our wonderful experts here. All right. Well, thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thank you, man. Bye now.
Have a good day.